Okay, so once you've unraveled your full roll and made sure that everything is good and you can use it, you start with the short end in your left hand, and you're gonna just make a slip knot. So you bring it around your fingers, put it underneath the little tail, and then you're gonna pull the long yarn through. Okay, so now you have a slip knot. Depending how loose you want it to be, you can make it around 4 fingers or 2 to 3 inches. If you want it to be a tighter knit blanket, then you want it to be a little bit smaller. So for me, I have kind of big hands, but I actually brought my measuring tape this time so we can measure and see, because I have no idea how big I make them. So if you want to get an accurate measurement, my size is 2.5. Can you see that? Oh, it's upside down. Okay, so it's approximately 2.5. That's the size that I like to work with, and that makes it like a medium tight stitch. So then you're gonna leave out your long working yarn. Okay, so you have your little tail that's just gonna sit off to the side. And I like to position and organize the yarn in the direction that I'm going. So you're gonna hold down that first stitch, bring through the long yarn underneath. So you can see, I just grab it with my fingers, and you bring it through while keeping the first yarn, the first stitch down, and then lay out your next stitch. So again, I always say to keep consistent, and yeah, so it's approximately 2.5. Okay, you really want to keep this uniform because it's going to give you this really pretty braid at the beginning of your blanket. So now you just want to count out, I do, this one's going to be 27 stitches, each stitch being 2.5 inches big. So you just want to keep it down with no movement, which is why it's good to have control over the yarn. And you're just going to keep down the previous stitch and make sure that each stitch is as uniform as possible. I mean, if there's like a little bit of give, it's not going to be the end of the world. You just don't want to have something that's monstrously larger or smaller, because then it's going to give you inconsistencies in the blanket and it won't look as pretty. So the other thing that I do is just make sure that I always have kind of a free amount of yarn, and that it's not like caught up in anything or part of the roll. So I also tend to lose count. So let's see where we're at. 2, 4, 12, 14, 16, 18, 24, 25, 26. Okay, so this blanket is 27 stitches for this specific design. I always recommend measuring out how big you want a blanket to be. So if you have a specific measurement in mind, doesn't matter what your stitch count is, you just need to measure out that it's going to match as the length that you want it to match, okay? So having a measuring tape is really important and good for the creation of the blanket. So now what you're going to do is you're going to flip this chain over, okay? So you're going to flip it over, and we're going to be working in the middle, part of the stitch. Okay, let's see if we can bring you closer a little bit. Okay, so we're going to be working in the middle. Again, let's just see if we can get you. Okay. So here, you have this middle stitch here, like the middle part of the braid, right? So that is gonna be what you're working with. And doing it through the middle is gonna give you a really pretty braid at the end. So again, you always wanna make sure that you're keeping a little bit of pressure on the previous stitch, and that again helps it from getting tightened or getting loose, okay? So you're gonna hold down the rest of the chain and bring through your stitch. So this is your first stitch. And again, we're gonna measure, and this is also 2.5, okay? So that's how I really get the beautiful uniform look of my blankets, is just the consistency of the stitches. So the way to get that consistency, again, is to hold down either side of your rope, I guess you could say, or your chain or your stitch pattern. So I think that's one thing that a lot of tutorials miss, is they make it sound like so super easy and you just pull through this loop, but they don't actually talk about keeping a little bit of pressure, like my pinky and my ring finger are holding down the chain so there isn't movement, because if I just loosely brought it through, then it's going to be a little bit sloppier, I guess, or loose knit. So this could just be like my, I don't know if it's an OCD, but attention to detail. So you just continue the whole chain like this. And again, you just want to make sure that you're, mostly even across your stitches. Okay. So here, now we're coming to the end of the chain, okay? So your last stitch, you're gonna leave it out to the side. So the last stitch that you've put through, you're just gonna leave it off, okay? Because this is gonna make your braid really pretty on the top part. Like, see how pretty that braid is on the bottom? So you're gonna get something similar across the side of the blanket as well. And now you're just going to bring your long yarn, the working yarn, through the loop, okay? And again, holding tension on the bottom part and the surrounding stitches, making sure that we're consistent in size. And that is what we do. So this would be like if you made the whole blanket the mustard color, you would just do this the whole way, and when you bring in another skein, you just tie the ends together, and I will show you how to do that as well once we come to that point. But yeah, you just, as long as you want your blanket to be, then you just add that many rows. So it depends the size of the stitches and the tightness of the stitches and what you want it to be. So here, now we're at the last loop here, okay? So this was your first loop. So when you bring this one through, you want to, again, make sure nothing's moving. You don't want to pull, you don't want this one to be too short or too long, because if you make it too long, you're gonna have sloppy edges. So you wanna make it consistent. So it's gonna sit at the end, but it's closing your blanket basically. So you wanna think of what it's gonna look like on the next stitch up. So keep it consistent, and then you're gonna leave it there, and then you're gonna move on to the next stitch. Again, always keeping your pattern down, okay? So I'm just going to make the blanket and then I will come back for the closing.